right, let's take it away. So we are talking about by popular demand, which is to say, someone on the internet, um, about Joel Spolsky's Strategy Letter 5 from 2002. But before we do, Adam, I feel we just need to wrap some things up from last week, just briefly.
Okay. I didn't really, this is a surprise. All right.
Little surprise. One, that was a lot of fun, actually. That was just, it was great to hear. And so, and I saw, where did Tim was here? I thought there he is. I'm going to ask Tim to speak. So Tim, I've invited you to speak. Hopefully you can join us. So I started buying a couple of these books, and then Amazon, of course, is just extremely excited and is now throwing all these suggestions at me. One of which was this book, Endless Loop, that I got, that I love. It's so good. This is a history of BASIC, which I'm really enjoying.
That's a great title, too.
Oh, it's a great title. Well, I mean, the third time's a charm. This guy's written 2 other histories of BASIC, which I think is great, including okay and not okay. But it's really good. But there was a line in this that I tweeted out over the weekend that I just found. I don't know if you saw this. Adam, first of all, did you ever code BASIC?
You know what? Not seriously. I mean, this is why the Endless Loop is so appealing to me, because that's basically the BASIC I coded on the Apple IIe in the computer lab. The print Brian Smells go to 10.
Right. Okay. So you never actually. So
no. I know the closest I got was I did some Visual BASIC, but very different.
Right. So you kind of post date just slightly, not by much.
Yes.
This is like the total, 5 years difference between
exactly.
us is where BASIC is where it shows up. So there's this line in that, and I think this is just absolutely delightful. That one, per our Martian conversation last time, Kemeny, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, really interesting guy. Kemeny and Kurtz are the inventors of BASIC, but he's one of the Martians. So he is with von Neumann and Erdős and so on, becomes the president of Dartmouth at a really young age. Really interesting kind of story there. Very progressive thinker. Invented the part of I always viewed BASIC as a punishment as opposed to being actually deliberately trying to actually make it accessible. I was not giving it enough credit. But I love the fact that they call the BASIC that I learned Street BASIC, which I think is I want to put that on a resume or something. I came up on the mean streets of Street BASIC.
That's right. You don't have book smarts BASIC. You have Street
BASIC. Yeah, he's like, no, and then, okay, so Tim, you are here, and I'm wondering if you can get, because you had this response that I just thought was incredible on the Gibsonian flavor. Can you tell me a little bit about your? I'd like you to do an out loud reading of this tweet. Is that unreasonable to ask?
To demand.
Well, yes.
Well, I mean, I have a copy of Neuromancer here in front of me. I recently read it, and I guess it was fresher on my mind.
So are you adopting well, first, can I ask you to do an out loud reading? Do you mind if I put you on the spot to do an out loud reading from your tweet?
Oh, yeah. It was, well, you first. It was a response to your tweet.
Well, so my tweet is, I feel I've already shown you mine. My tweet is all about that I came up learning Street BASIC.
Yeah. Mine was basically just, hey, that sounds like Gibson. Case snapped the ROM into his deck and paused. His ice stayed quiet. A new shape flickered in the corner of his vision, strobing amber at 60 hertz. He turned to squint at the glowing text. It was Street BASIC, a cowboy's mother tongue.
Oh, beautiful.
It's just monkey see, monkey do. It's just, trying to evoke that style.
Okay, well, so here's my question.
Hackers Cowboys, so I called Hackers Cowboy,
Is that a particular passage, or is that written in the style of Gibson?
No, I just stole some lingo he uses.
Jesus.
Case is the name of his character. He talks about ROMs and ice for intrusion countermeasures and people aren't hackers, they're console cowboys. So, it's just the lingo.
It's okay. I'm just telling you, it's fucking art, man. That was great. It was so good. It was so literary. I feel that I'm not really that speaks to me more than Gibson itself, honestly. I feel that it was terrific. Very, very well written. And it reminds me of the Imitation Hemingway contest winner at Microsoft that I actually like more than Hemingway itself. The imitation can be better than the original, and I think that is the case here. I'd love to say.
I'm actually, strictly speaking, much too young to have grown up with BASIC, but I did anyways. My family was very, very poor. Had a hand-me-down Apple II that a neighbor gave us, in the mid-'90s. And I taught myself BASIC from one of the Apple books that came with the computer when I was, 8 or 9 years old, and it felt like magic.
So there is something great about that. Reminds me of, and Tranich had that line too, Adam, earlier at an earlier space about how not having a lot as a kid. You still had this magical machine, even though it was a hand-me-down in the mid-'90s. It's a decade out of date. Tim, you're still able to make this thing do magical things many years after its putative prime.
Yeah, occasionally someone asks me, "Why are you a programmer?" I tell them, "Well, I wanted to be a wizard, but this is the closest I could do."
I wanted to book first-class tickets on Pan Am to Paris. That's the reason that come on. That's a. It's a war game reference, kids.
Yeah, I'm hanging with you with the war game reference.
Okay, that's there was a time when you might not always, so it's good.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah,
I'm relieved.
But you're right. There is that first a creativity from adversity, but then also just like a simpler era where you could put all these pieces together without it being quite as complicated.
But the kids today are building computers out of Minecraft. It's like
that's true.
They recreate that simplicity for themselves, which I think is pretty.
That's right. They don't have a parallel. They don't have a parallel port, and they can't flash GPIOs, but they do have Minecraft, and it's very different. But you're right that it's scratching a very similar.
I actually disagree with that. They have Arduinos, which do have GPIO ports, maybe not parallel port, but something very analogous to that.
Yeah, no, yeah.
No, they do, but it's not. And agreed that they have access to the same kinds of things, but I think it's not as it's not necessarily in the family PC like it used to be in the family.
But
PC.
you have to admit, Adam, now you want to have Dan's guide, it's GPIO based parenting.
If you guys don't mind, I would like to tie together this topic of using BASIC past its prime with an aspect of the history of accessible computing that I didn't get to cover a few weeks ago.
Yeah, go for it.
So there were starting in the late 80s and going up through the early 2000s, one of the earliest PDAs, if you remember that term, that were designed specifically for blind people was a device called the Braille and Speak, and it was a portable portable device with a Braille keyboard and text to speech output, and it was battery powered, running a Z80 processor. It first came out in 1987, and I think they discontinued it in 2000 or 2001. But there was there was a blind kid in 2002 who was using one of these Braille and Speak devices as his way of taking notes and doing assignments in class at school. And this device had a BASIC interpreter on it, and that was his introduction to programming. So
that's pretty great, and I very much
and he became a protege of mine through a mutual friend. So. But his introduction to programming was on this PDA designed for blind people using BASIC.
That is awesome.
I should say I should caveat I've never written BASIC with. I did a lot of programming on the TI-82 back in the day, which was its own flavor of BASIC.
So, Adam, you got to read this book, man, because the Trash 80 is all over this place. I mean, it's you'll like it.
Sweet, yeah, I'm into it.
All right, so that is. Sorry, I just had to get that out.
There we go. Clearing the slate, and now
clearing the slate. And now only 11 minutes in. So, did you read this thing when it originally came out, Adam?
I mean, if I did, so this came out when in 2002.
Can I jump? Can I jump back to the previous thing real quick?
Sure.
Please, sure.
The very first ISP that I worked for, we had a blind user, and he was using, I believe it was actually a very, very early version of one of the assistive software programs from Dragon. And I remember going over to his apartment because he lived 2 blocks away from us to help him get set up. And the thing I noticed was what it was actually doing was it was reading off all of these syscalls that were happening. So like when a dialog box popped up, it would be like dialogue, blah, 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 button, blah, 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 button, blah, blah, blah. And then when he would click the mouse, it would be like mouse button down, mouse button up. And so like
that must have been like a very early Windows screen reader. If it was doing that.
But I remember thinking this would actually be a
sorry,
really
guys.
way.
I'm taking you this space further afield.
No worries, Matt. No, it's all good.
I remember thinking how great that would be as an introduction to the Windows syscall. Like, if you were trying to become a Windows programmer, you could just sit there and turn that on and just listen to it all day, and you would just start to pick up what was going on.
I don't think I'm acquainted with this program that you're talking about, but I mean, I'm not aware of any Windows screen reader that was quite as raw as what you're describing. But then I did come into that whole aspect of accessible computing a little bit late. So anyway.
Well, I love this idea of like an S-Trace or Truss sonar that you can just have on the background. That sounds awesome.
And well, then it also has to be said that because this, Tom, I know the Snoop option to generate network traffic over Dev Audio. In fact, I don't even Tom, do you know anything about that? That would even been you. But this was kind of famously Snoop would generate output over Dev Audio. Do you remember this, Adam?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I never used it productively, but there were certainly
I definitely never used it productively.
Who thought they could.
Exactly. Tom, were you the guilty party?
That was useful. That was genuinely useful.
Yeah, I don't remember that. But.
Oh, I remember that. We used to do stuff like, pipe the output of ping through sed and change the word bytes to a control G or something. And that would be really useful because if you were like chasing down a break in ThinNet, you'd run that on a workstation and start mucking around with the Ethernet cables. And when you found the segment that had been disconnected, all of a sudden you heard these beeps coming from all down the hallway. That was incredibly useful.
This is like automating my role in every home construction project, which is basically to tell my father when the light was on or off from upstairs or what have you. And yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, so
So strategy letter 5.
Strategy letter 5
from Joel. So if I read it back in 2002, I have no memory of it. Did you read it? Do you remember reading it? I don't know.
I definitely don't remember reading it. If I read it at the time, because I was trying to remember the go-go days of 2002. This is before blogging, more or less. Like, I'm not sure where I would have read it. I mean, I guess he just would have put it on his website. But,
yeah, that's right. But you're right. It was before blogging was as broadly as the things it became, for sure. But this was right up your alley, and not to out you as the economics nerd that you are or were, but this is. But I guess I just did. But this is right in your crosshairs, right?
It is, and I wrote a piece 2 years later that I don't. Part of the reason I don't think I read this is because I didn't refer to it in the economics of software piece that I wrote 2 years later. I feel that there are some truisms in here, but actually, let me ask you: what's your take on this?
I thought it was very thought-provoking, but there were definitely some pretty big holes in the arguments. In particular, identifying total cost of ownership as being a critical factor, but then ignoring that for for lots of convenient examples.
Yeah. And I feel that he's got a little bit of that Microsoft hangover. I mean, you can take the boy out of Microsoft, but you can take Microsoft out of the boy, apparently. There's a little bit of that pejorative sense that he has towards open source, just in general. There's also, like, there are a couple of lines in here that are just, like, he's got a line, because I think, here's the big thing that he misses. That is, I think, very important for understanding not just software, or not just open source software, but software, is this idea that the cost of goods sold, the cost to manufacture software is zero. And I feel that's an extremely important detail. It doesn't, once you've written it, it doesn't cost anything to manufacture.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I had that written down as a note where, and that the supply is infinite.
And the supply is infinite.
That's part and parcel of what you're saying. But if you drive up demand, your COGS is the same. Your distribution is, again, back in that day, there was a printed CD in like a box and shrink wrap and that kind of stuff. But even then,
God, you're so old. So you have this line. It's like, debugged code is not free, whether proprietary or open source. It's like, it actually is. Sorry. It is. Debugging code is not free. Like, if you've got code that's defective, getting that debugged is not free. But if you have code that's debugged, or code that has bugs in it, if you have software, that software actually is free from like a manufacturing perspective.
Well, I think that does tack into one of his great lines, which was casting a bunch
and
of
keeping it debugged in a changing environment is, so maintenance is also not free.
Sure.
The rub, right? I mean, like, when he says that it's not free, I think that's what he's referring to.
That is definitely what he's implicitly referring to, is that this kind of ongoing maintenance of software. But I also feel that this misses something important about software, in that, yes, we always think about software maintenance, but software actually doesn't need maintenance in any traditional sense. Software doesn't actually wear out. And
especially if it's running on a platform that has managed to be stable. Case in point, the speech synthesizer that I use every day was last updated in 2002.
That's a great case in point, actually, Matt, is that you have something that basically the things around it haven't changed, and so the hardware will long since wear out, but the software lives on. So on the one hand, yes, like, improving software is not free, but this is like the paradox of software that's like super expensive to develop at some level.
But I think part of the problem is that any software business model relies on obsoleting software.
Well, and I would even suggest that sometimes it's the data that software interacts with that is obsoleting the software, in terms of, like, I have a Macintosh from 1996 that still boots up. It's got a copy of Netscape Navigator on it of that vintage. That copy of Navigator starts up fine, but it is essentially useless to me because it cannot make sense of today's web.
And of course, my preferred speech synthesizer from 2002 isn't keeping up with changes in the language. For instance, it didn't know how to pronounce coronavirus.
Oh, interesting. How does it pronounce it?
Coronavirus or something like that.
Interesting, right? Of course, yeah, that makes sense. Right, sure, but in the bowels of software, you have small bits of software that grow larger over time, that actually the things around them don't change, and that they actually are. I mean, I don't know, Adam, I'm sure you've had this a couple of times where we've had flashbacks to software we've written 20 years ago that's been untouched in the last 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, I was debugging some of it today where, kind of offhanded jokes I had made in the dtrace source code, 15, 20 years ago, kind of caught me off guard today. So yeah, and it's just cranking along.
And I think that's an really important thing to understand, because this piece is all about like, I'm going to drive down the price of my complementary goods. And I think it kind of misses the boat in terms of open source's ability to create a larger pie. and be able to, if I can, and he definitely misunderstands Sun in this piece. I don't know, Adam, what you feel about his?
Another sort of meta point, which is he makes reference to cathedrals and bazaars in the essay. And I don't know, did anyone else wonder if, because, Eric Raymond's essay came out in 1999. So it's almost like he took the point from Cathedral and the Bazaar and like kind of argued the opposite.
Oh, yeah, and he, for sure. I mean, he's a cathedralist, but so I'm like there. I'm kind of sympathetic because I mean, the Bazaar versus Cathedral is a false dichotomy, right? But it's a good point, I mean, in that the Cathedral versus the Bazaar is much more current in 2002 than it is. To what degree do people still know about that? Have you read is it a piece or a book? I tried,
Essay.
It was an essay that became a book collection of essays, I believe.
I think, right. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. I definitely feel I've seen it in both form factors. And I feel, I mean, that is a huge false dichotomy. Okay, all right. So hot take, Cathedral and the Bazaar actually sets open source back. That idea.
Yeah, just because it's too reductive.
It's too reductive. Yeah. It basically says if you believe in engineered deliberate software, you are a proprietary cathedralist. And similarly, if you are participating in an open source project, you are in this like totally unplanned helter-skelter bazaar. It's like, actually, no.
Oh, or perhaps it was a dichotomy that was relevant at the time for helping to explain things. Perhaps that may be overly generous.
I think I agree with that, and not only because I happen to work for a company that runs open source projects in what Cathedral and the Bazaar would call a very cathedral-like fashion.
I would actually kind of disagree with the entire thesis there. His example of the cathedral was Emacs. I mean, that is not...
I didn't realize that.
I mean, that was the example that was posited in the original essay.
Right.
Emacs and GCC were presented as examples of cathedral model, where the source code was only available each time the software was released, like there was a point release or a major release. But between releases, they were restricted to an internal group, whereas the Bazaar model was everything was developed in the public on the internet. So, both the Cathedral and Bazaar in that respect are open source. It's just different flavors of open source.
I do believe that one of the fundamental advantages of Linux was the development model, willingness to take contributions from anywhere.
So I agree with you, Tom. I think that to me, a fundamental advantage was that it was forkophilic, not forkophobic. In that it encouraged people to go do experiments and did not insist on. And I realized that maybe I need to go. It kills me to just because Eric Raymond is such a. Anyway, how can I consume this without giving them any royalties? Because I do realize that maybe I have falsely read into it that it was kind of a proprietary versus open model, but that is funny that Emacs is the canonical cathedral. So fine, I believe in open cathedrals.
I was wondering if maybe there was also, it's been a long time since I read it, but I'm wondering if maybe there was implicit contrast with the way the BSDs did things, where there was a group that had commit bits. Yeah, and anything that happened had to go through that group.
That really is the critical distinction in the Linux world.
And you were working with things like CVS or later Subversion that didn't have the same again forkophilic.
No, that wasn't so much it. I mean, the thing that really contrasted Linux versus as the canonical Bazaar was this kind of like we take from everything. And if you talk to some of the folks who were involved in both the BSD community and the early Linux community, they'll talk about, hey, Linux was great because we didn't have to satisfy the gods of BSD before we could get something, into the distribution.
Just don't invent a rampant layer violation, apparently.
Well, there was also the whole era when there were the AC patches to the Linux kernel, and there were a lot of people who were like, yeah, the mainline Linux kernel is great, but if you want to get anything done on modern hardware, you need the AC patches. And then later on, they got merged back into the mainline kernel.
Well, and I guess that's what I kind of meant is that there was this contentment to have things live down that I think is actually very healthy. I think it's good for people to be able to go off and do experiments and be able to go develop things on their own and be able to take the system in different directions. I would argue also, personally, obviously, that because there's so much that is only 80% complete, and in Linux in particular, and there's a lot of things that would benefit from being better thought out.
By the way, Brian, to answer your passing question or comment about how you could read the essay without giving Eric Raymond any royalties, the original essay is available on his website.
But does that website have ads on it? So, I've got to ask these questions.
No, we're talking about Eric Raymond. His website does not have ads.
That's fair. Fair point. Fair point. All right. Yeah. I guess I can go safely consume it. But one of the things,
and if you don't want to give him any traffic, I'm sure you could pull it from the Internet Archive.
Yeah, there we go. That's how I'll do it. I can figure out a way to do it. I also want to give. I think Joel credit for being. There's certain elements in here that I think are prophetic. I do think that it's prophetic in terms of seeing open source as being in a company's commercial best interests. I feel like that was not something that people really, that was not a widely held view in 2002.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that his, although in the early days it felt
was 2002 like before or after SCO had sued IBM?
Before, I think.
I believe that is going to be after, but close, right? I was
like, it's post Halloween memos, but I don't remember how far post.
A lawsuit's filed in 2003, according to this.
The Halloween memo, the original Halloween memo was 1998.
So the Halloween memo may that merits, I think, an explanation. This is because the Halloween memo is the Microsoft document, right?
Yes, and if I remember, I don't remember if it was the Halloween memos or if it was leakage of verbal statements that he made, but it was the kind of origin, at least in era, of the Microsoft viewpoint that open source is a cancer, the GPL is a cancer,
I think Steve Ballmer actually came out and said that in like 2001.
Right, exactly.
I want to say that. Yeah, it was Steve Ballmer that said it, and it set the tone for quite some time.
Well, and I guess that's prophetic too, in that they correctly realized. This is a kind of a moronic thing to say, but open source is a really big deal, actually. Just the deeper I get into my career, the more and especially, and I think we said this before here, but going back and reading tales of software development in the 90s makes you realize how far we've come in a world of, for example, having to pay for your compiler is insane, right? We have not had to do that for a generation. And, no one is ever going to pay for a compiler ever again, more or less. And
then again, sometimes you read, you read comments on like Hacker News about how we developers are entitled cheapskates that aren't willing to pay for quality tools.
We have got honestly, the highest quality development environment I've ever used in my career is the one I'm using right now. And it's 100% open source. We are getting, the tooling, I feel, has just gotten better and better and better. And there are, this is, I hate I'm like Eric Raymond and now Naval, but he used to tweet about the thing about open source is that problems only need to be solved once. And there's a lot of truth to that, actually. And that is really powerful.
The other thing, though, is that, these tools are really good because they're built by people who want to use them, not by people who want to sell them. And so you satisfy yourself, and it makes it really good.
That is definitely true.
I will accept shoddy open source tooling that I can patch myself over proprietary tooling that I can't fix when it annoys the shit out of me any day.
Well, this is what we point internally. Obviously at Oxide, we definitely believe in open source software, but we actually really believe in high quality software. And actually, the proprietary software that's high quality doesn't bother me nearly as much as the proprietary software that needs to be fixed. And the problem is that there's very little of that proprietary software that's high quality.
Well, on that topic, Joel talked about, was it OpenOffice or StarOffice, which is a great example, I think, of the opposite, where it got no traction because it was not anywhere near the quality of the proprietary alternatives.
Well, and I think, I'm glad you mentioned that, Adam, because that kind of gets us to like the big thing that I think that and I mean, in his defense, like no one really saw coming, the degree to which we would use software as a service to even edit our documents, right? The fact that we use Google, I don't.
Yes, yeah. I think it's okay to admit that.
Right? You mind to save space? Can I talk about Google Docs here? But and that I would never again install. I certainly wouldn't. And that I'm never in my life going to install proprietary software on a desktop machine to edit a document. That's never going to happen again.
It's interesting that you mention that in the context of SAS, though, because for quite some time now, Richard Stallman and the FSF have been on a bit of a crusade against SAS to the point of, as they do so often, service as a
software substitute.
Yeah, and so they really consider SAS just to be another proprietary presentation of software because you don't get the source code, you can't modify it, you can't do anything but
and you can't even hack around it in the ways that you might be able to if it were running locally on your machine.
Sure. I mean, yes, but, right. I mean, this is where I think that the FSF sometimes loses the forest for the trees, where, sure, but to me, open source is about actually creating the components more than the actual products. And it's like, when I'm consuming a service, I actually am consuming a product. And it is actually more important to me that I can get to those underlying components because I can actually build on those components. Give me the Lego brick so I can go build my own thing. I actually don't need Gmail to be open source. It's personally, but I don't know. Maybe that's that.
No, I think you're right. And when it comes to productivity software,
most of the people from the Free Software Foundation would go back and point out that we, the FSF, are talking about free software. You're talking about open source, and that's not the same thing.
Yeah, I think we're getting hit a bit by the Twitter Spaces delays too. Sorry, Adam. I think you were. What were you saying?
That's all right. I'll step back for a second.
And the distinction between I get where they're coming from. I think that the problem is that the FSF has lost its efficacy because they've. I think that they end up picking the wrong fights and then ignoring the ones that are much more important, right? Like, can we get an amicus brief in Oracle v. Google, please? But Adam, one thing I wanted to kind of ask your take on it. Have you read any of his other strategy letters, by the way?
I read some as a result of this one, but if I had, I didn't remember the previous one. So how about you?
Obviously, I remember reading his 20 questions to ask your future employer or whatever. What is this?
I don't remember that one.
Oh, no, there's like a checklist.
The Joel test. The 12-point Joel test.
Yes, the Joel test. Thank you. This is do they use source code control? Do they? I think this is arguably the most famous thing he's ever written. And when was the last time you read I don't know if you've read the Joel test recently. So you surely have seen the Joel test, Adam. If you saw it, you'd recognize it.
I'll go look for it now. Yeah.
I can't rattle off all 12 from memory, but I have read it.
And it's like some of it is like, do you have the best tools that money can buy?
It's like, yes, $0.
$0, exactly. I remembered him from that, but I had not read his other kind of strategy letters. He's got a piece that definitely believes that Gmail is not the future model circa 2007, which is interesting because I don't know that I don't know that I necessarily would have disagreed with it in 2007, but it's clearly
Well, what
Google
I
talked about
recall
that in
from
2007, so that was fun.
if you're talking about strategy letter 6 from 2007, what I recall from that one was that he thought that the current generation of web applications like Gmail were kind of akin to the DOS generation of PC apps, in that they couldn't interoperate with each other very well, and he thought that something akin to Windows was going to come along and be implemented on top of the web platform to allow these and of course, this being 2007, Ajax or Web 2.0 or whatever you want to call it was still pretty hot, and he was trying to predict where that generation of web apps was going to go, and I think he was wrong, because I think what really happened was that the web apps got upstaged by mobile native apps. Although now, I mean, that's not to say that web apps are irrelevant. That's also a stupid false dichotomy. But that's what I recall from that letter.
Wasn't that the era when the Chromebook really came into being as a concept? Because
2000 Chromebook was 2010, 2011.
But I remember back in like 2007-ish, people were saying the web browser is going to be the new operating system. Everything will be built on the web browser as the platform.
Oh, Netscape was predicting that as far back as the late 90s.
Why does everything have to be the operating system of something?
Well, Emacs was the original.
Again, I agree, Josh. Like
Xfinity. Well, whom I'm not going to say too many bad things about, but certainly like the it's not this modem you've sold me is not the operating system of my home. Don't call it that.
Well, if you want the example, the Naples Ultra of this is WeWork. WeWork was making an operating system
for buildings.
Yes, we are the
critically though. We are not a building management system, which is a thing that exists already.
Right? No, not a building management system. That would be very pedestrian. We are building an operating system for the way you live, Josh. So
everybody wants to be a platform, right? And so operating system is just a way to say that.
Everybody wants to be a platform. No, Tom, why is that? Why does everyone want to be a platform?
At least it's an ethos, I guess.
There's a lot of lock-in and being the center of the ecosystem.
So that's my read too, is that people want to be a platform for purely out of their own capitalistic rapaciousness. That there's not like a better reason than that. That like
and the email thing, like talking about looking back then, the thing that happened with email was less about the success of this one web application and more about how a few large actors managed to make it almost impossible to run your own email. Actually, like the structure of email as a federated system is extremely difficult to participate in unless you are already Google.
Well, I think that was a casualty of the spam arms race.
Yeah, that was spam. That had very little
sure.
Gmail.
But between Google and Microsoft with Outlook.com, it is effectively, and has been for quite some time, structurally basically impossible to ensure deliverability unless you are one of those like organizations.
All right, and Brian, you were asking about the Sun shout out in this blog post, which is part of the reason I thought you were kind of kicking it my way on Twitter the other day.
I accidentally muted everyone a second ago. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to mute everybody. Sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
No problem. So,
sorry, I can tell when you want me to stop.
Exactly. I just.
But what was your take, having lived through from when did you join Sun, 96 through 2009? What did you think of Joel's take on Sun? And open source?
Well, obviously a gross caricature. I mean, the viewing Sun. He's I think genuinely perplexed by Sun's motivations, because like Sun's a hardware company. Why are they pushing Java? Oh, they're pushing Java because of their hatred. It's an emotional, self-destructive act out of their emotional hatred of Microsoft. And it's like, come the fuck on, dude. Like, come on. That is just, no. I do feel that a core belief that I think Sun was not the only company that had this belief, but a core belief of Sun was about making the pie larger, that it was in everybody's interest to make the pie larger. And to me, and Tom, I would love to actually get your perspective on this because you lived it, but to me, truly one of the most iconoclastic things that Sun did was porting NFS to their rivals' platforms, porting it to Ultrix and to IRIX back in the mid-'80s, right, Tom? Late 80s, early 90s?
Oh, yeah, mid to late 80s. It was on everything that moved.
But
and
Sun didn't do those ports. They just released the source code as the reference implementation, then hosted these like interoperability fests or something.
But we had actually a substantial consulting group that would do a lot of the work.
Yeah, it's Sun did. That's right. That was my understanding. Maybe, yeah, Tom, you could speak to it, but it's like it definitely happened because Sun was actively encouraging it and putting resources behind it. And it was a
pretty different to what Microsoft then did with SMB.
a little different.
A little bit.
But you know, Sun and Microsoft were in talks for a while to converge, even back very early on. And we looked at the SMB protocol and all this stuff about printers, and it was like, well, this will never fit in Unix.
Yeah, and the op locking. Oh, the op locking, which is it feels like it's not necessarily a bad idea. It's just fraught with peril.
Well, locking and networking don't get along at all.
Yes, words to live by. Locking and networking definitely don't get along. So I felt like that piece, Adam, that part of it was, I thought, pretty misplaced because I think it. Actually, maybe Tom. So taking that NFS as an example, what is going through the mind of Sun as they are pushing NFS? Because it's like maybe I am retrofitting my own view on a historical Sun, but my view was the belief in open systems was if we can get everybody collaborating on this protocol, we can get more people using networking computing. And if we get more people to use network computing, that's a bigger pie that we can go compete for.
Right. But it's also, you know, one of Joel's columns is all about switching costs. I forget which one, but you know, it made it easy to insert Sun into some other environment. You know, that was dominated by mini computers or whatever. If you could have NFS, and then, you know, just lots more walls came down.
Yeah, this is something that I remember that McNeely had a piece talking about the need for an off ramp. That it was important for technology to have an off ramp, which I actually, I mean, I think it's important for this is what people that use technology don't want to be locked in. We don't want to be locked in, right? I don't want to be locked in. You don't want to be locked in. When we, as technologists, make technology-based choices, we don't want to be locked in. We want to know, at least in the abstract, that we can go take ourselves elsewhere relatively easily.
Yeah, but similarly, you know, you'd have companies that say, "Oh, we're an IBM shop," and Sun could turn around and say, "Well, look, we have NFS for the mainframe. You should try this out." So, of course, they'd have to buy a few workstations to try it out.
Well, I think that was, you know, Joel says that, you know, Java and write once, run anywhere didn't make sense. But I think through that lens, it was lowering the barriers to get that IBM shop. And you do that when you're in a point of strength, when your hardware is better than other folks.
Yeah, and Java succeeded at becoming a platform. Sun failed at monetizing it. So that's the crux of Sun and software, is that Sun can never monetize software. It was always hardware.
Microsoft has a pretty.
I wonder though if that was because they gave too much away, and maybe they were pressured to give too much away because we've been conditioned by open source to expect our development tools for free.
Well, the other thing is they never had anything above the platform.
Yeah.
And this is where Apple shines. Apple has all kinds of apps, and it's a appliance and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Whereas Sun was always, look at this great platform, but we're done.
Sun was all about making standards but not providing reference implementations, and that was an issue in the early Java days. I remember being very enthusiastic about Java the first time I saw it. I was like, this is pretty cool. You know, I mean, compared to like C++, it was, especially C++ Circle, like 1997 or something. I mean, it was a panacea. Right. And, you know, then they were saying like, hey, we're going to have like Java spaces and, you know, application servers and stuff. And you're like, cool, where do I get these things? It's like, Go talk to WebLogic. They'll sell you one for $500,000. Like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Well, I remember looking at some Java apps back in the day when people were, actually intending to build Java desktop applications, and the only thing you could really get away with was to build them with, what was it, AWT or whatever, the Advanced Windowing Toolkit, and it
Abstract
looked like
Windowing
TWM.
Toolkit, or as my high school programming teacher in '97 called it, the Awful Windowing Toolkit.
Yeah, it looked like TWM from 1986. So aesthetically, if your experience of Java was apps that looked like that, you were like, no, something else.
Hey, just a quick mechanical note. I know we've got more folks requesting to speak than we've got. Fortunately, Twitter Spaces only allows us to have a finite number of speakers. It's set at 12 right now, so we're at our cap. So if we can get more folks, just to allow us to get more folks in there. It's a little PSA. Sorry, I didn't mean to kind of. But
is there a way to relinquish my slot as a speaker, short of leaving the space and coming back in?
Yes, I think. I don't know if you can relinquish it. I can relinquish you.
in the three-dot menu at the top, there is a switch to listening thing.
Ooh, there you go. But not everyone all at once. So sorry, folks that have been requesting that.
Microsoft have been pretty addle-minded on this stuff for a long time, though. Like, I mean, for a very long time, .NET was called cross-platform, and by which I think they meant, I don't know, both kinds of Windows, like NT and the other one. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, I think they meant hardware platforms. Like their whole deal was IL will run on Alpha and x86, and
Yes, right. All by cross-platform, I mean all the platforms on which we run, of course.
Right, but they would say those things with a straight face, and people would like, so can I run it on Unix? And it's like, what is that?
That's actually not what we meant exactly.
Yeah, they managed to convince most of the world that anything from Microsoft was open systems, right?
Yeah, did they manage to convince the world of that? I don't know if they
well, not
did or
not
not.
as tech guys, but an awful lot of the world thought, PC equals open. Right?
That is true. It is true that they thought that, which is kind of paradoxical because I don't necessarily. Anyway, yeah, it is. I think you're right, Tom. That they definitely think that. I mean,
of course, to the mainframe world, anything non-mainframe was open systems.
Right.
That's also true. Right. Everything was open by comparison. So I think this question about the about Sun and the I guess the monetization of Java is interesting. For whatever it's worth, Arthur Van Hoff, just take this as just a statement of fact. Arthur Van Hoff told me in 1997 that every E10K that was sold because of Java. Now, I obviously disagreed with this. And in fact, I may have disagreed with this in a relatively colorful way that may have alienated the rest of the people at the dinner that I was at. But that was definitely his perspective. Was that? Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
Well, I could see from part of it because the early versions of Java and Solaris were horrible. They were terrible. If you tried to do I/O, it would issue a system call, a read or write for every single byte.
Well, yeah, and I think that I do feel that like the failure is the failure to kind of connect all the dots. I feel that like you've got the potential to build a great system, one that's open, one that customers believe in, but you do need to connect all the dots, and you need to actually. There's a lot of execution involved to get all that working.
I mean,
I think Sun was slow to get Java going on the server side. They spent way too much time on mobile phones and stuff like that.
Yes, amen.
The line that definitely resonated was when he described Sun as a loose cannon, and that sounded right. And it also made me think that
I think they really overpromised with it as well, because I remember how early it became a joke that Java was write once, debug everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Surely that's just software, though, right? I mean.
Yeah, but they had actually explicitly made the promise that because Java was bytecode compiled, You could write your Java app and it would run everywhere on every architecture. And, it was going to be this magical new world of cross-platform software written, compiled to bytecode. And it didn't pan out. And if they hadn't promised it, no one would have expected it, but they did, and people did, and then it was disappointing.
What's the directory separator on MVS?
Who says they have directories?
Exactly.
Anybody work with Stratus VOS?
No.
Okay,
I mean, a lot of the challenges that people ran into with Java cross-platform were not necessarily due to OS differences. It was because of web application server differences, like WebSphere versus Tomcat was the common thing. And then the other thing that they hit was often like cross database support, where you'd write an application that was meant to support like Oracle and Postgres and MySQL, and of course, such an undertaking is more difficult in practice than just write once, run anywhere.
On the other hand, you can run Jira on FreeBSD or Illumos, and that's never been built for those platforms. So,
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
From
the Jira and Confluence perspective, I'm talking here. The challenges with cross OS development and deployment were very rarely due to operating system differences, and were way more often due to web application server and database differences. Those were the things that bit Jira and Confluence early on. The only kind of caveat to that would be that there is differences in performance for operating systems when you're running something like Bitbucket Server, where shelling out to Git can cause very different performance under Windows versus other platforms, and that has been a cause of problems.
Hey, can I? This is James Todd. I actually worked on the Tomcat team back at Sun. Worked at Sun a long time. I'm just kind of curious about folks' comments about reference applications not being made available. Admittedly, Sun didn't leverage everything that's Java, but I'm still doing Java to this very day. I totally love it. I think Ant and Tomcat kind of changed the world quite a bit personally. I mean, not trying to pat my back or anything, but how did Sun not make reference implementations readily available?
It wasn't that they didn't make them readily available. It's that, at the time, they were not as mature as the alternatives. And
I agree.
And Sun, I remember going to, kind of ironically, it was probably early 2001, like January or something, going to the Sun office in the World Trade Center and to see a presentation about Java. And, basically the sales engineers there were like, look, we're not interested in producing something that you're going to run your production applications on. We're interested.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think it's shiny and awesome, frankly, changed the world. I was about ready to read how to do, Borland and X Windows and all sorts of stuff. So I think Java liberated a ton of things. Frankly, I'm really fascinated with Rust. I love the Oxide threads and conversations. But the fit and finish, Sun should have owned a number of businesses like Veritas, EMC, etc.
Oh, amen. Amen.
Right.
Totally.
And James, this is how, that was the deck on which we got them to basically fund us for Fishworks, right? Is that Sun had invented NFS, and when we started Fishworks in 2006, we had 0.1% share of the NAS filer space. It's that's embarrassing. And I always felt like the problem was just not quite getting to that. And Sun had a hard time putting these incredible pieces together into a fit and finished product.
Yeah. And there's a related one near and dear to my heart from the late 80s. Sun was the number 3 router company. Nobody knew that we made routers.
Yeah, Tom, your retrospective on stuff is just fascinating. I worked on the Juxta team for a while, by the way, which I think was Genie next. If we could have just got our shit together, right? But anyway, it just felt like we were kind of in a little bit of a bubble celebrating things, and then people were coming along with us, but then we didn't go with them. I'm not sure what that gap was, but I'm not sure. But anyway, I'll step down. Thanks for letting me speak in. This is awesome.
Yeah, James, thanks for the comments. Juxta and Genie. I remember at some point we had. Do you remember we were drinking coffee out of Juxta cups? Do you remember this?
Juxta was killing it. being a peer-to-peer sort of guy and loving decentralization, I wish a hell of a lot more Facebook, for example, was decentralized, So the technologies Sun had in the day one and continue to build and evolve were spot on. Clearly, right? Like in the IDE that, NetBeans, again, very Frankenstein-y to your earlier point, just amazing. I actually had Juxta working within NetBeans at one point. Probably nobody knows that. I did that right before I left. But anyway, it had all the gems and jewels, and frankly, reference implementations were readily made available. And the world's kind of moved on without Sun. But within Sun, I'm not sure what it was. I don't think it was engineer infighting. I don't think it was marketing and product conflicting with each other, but the execution was clearly lacking on many fronts.
Well, we didn't really have any end user DNA. We were all about being developers and helping developers.
Tom, your comment about Apple Kit, that just resonates with me so much. I mean, I started building apps kind of looking at what Apple was doing as far as UI. I mean, they hide all the details, right? So, but yeah.
On the topic of not having any end user DNA, Sun specifically. So you guys were talking about AWT GUI earlier, and Joel Spolsky in one of his more rambling articles, I think, called Lord Palmerston on Programming. He was talking about various cross-platform GUI options. And he compared Sun's GUI implementations in Java, AWT and Swing, to Star Trek aliens who had been watching humanity through a telescope and knew what human food was supposed to look like, but didn't know what it was supposed to taste like. And his point being that they never really got their GUIs to feel like a native GUI should.
Yeah, I don't differ with that. The thing is, that's a server company just going that far and trying to get there, right? I mean, AWT was horrific. So,
well,
reminds me of the plot of Galaxy Quest,
right? Well, actually, what's funny is that exact and that almost to the word analogy was used to explain the source code of AIX. That someone one of our customers had a source license to AIX, and they described AIX as Unix as if written by an alien species from another planet that had been given POSIX but no other context.
You never heard AIX ain't Unix?
Right, exactly.
I would argue that cross OS GUI is inherently an extremely difficult problem to solve, where if you're trying to write once and make it run in on Mac and Windows and to look native and feel native to both of those platforms, that's still not really a solved problem today, in my opinion. And you can see that in the proliferation of Electron as a solution to that problem.
Well,
where
Mozilla's
run around it.
Mozilla's Zool got pretty close back in the day, at least on Windows and desktop Linux. I can't vouch for how good it might have been on Mac, but it was certainly better to do. It was certainly possible to do better than Swing.
It was still extremely difficult to get right, even if you're native to that development environment. And Zool was extremely difficult to work in. I imagine most people would read the initial documentation, balk, and walk away and try and do something a little bit easier, in my opinion.
But Ian, hasn't the browser become that effectively? I mean, isn't the browser that?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Is like the browser and by extension Electron has been the de facto solution over the past 4 years or so, which in my opinion is also just a bit of an end run around the problem, where it's like, well, we can't solve this problem. Let's just do a window, and then inside that is another browser, and then you can do whatever the hell you want inside of that, and it'll look like a web app. It won't look like a native app. It'll look like a web app everywhere.
The success of that approach, though, highlights the fact that people actually don't give two hoots about native controls for the most part. So all the stuff about Java doesn't look right, nor does any Electron application. They all look like the Electron application. They don't look like the native platform very much at all.
I kind of got excited about, I think it was JSF, Java Server Faces, which and frankly, I stepped away from UI stuff at that point. Beyond Swing. I mean, anybody take a look at that at all? But again, I totally went to big data.
Well, that's a server-side web framework, right?
Yeah, JSF.
The thing that I got excited about it at one point was the SWT toolkit from IBM, which kind of takes the WX widgets approach of mostly doing wrappers on top of the actual platform. Well, it's kind of like AWT done better. I guess it's really what it is.
AWT being like alpha, and then along comes beta, and then at least it got started. And I think there is something out there today if one really wanted to look into it. So, Brian, I probably relinquish my speaker if others need it. I again thoroughly enjoyed this, and thanks for hosting all this. This is awesome.
Oh, James, it's great to see you. Yeah, no, you're all good. But in terms of like the browser having kind of become the de facto way that we interface effectively graphically with these applications, I feel like the substrate on which we build is virtually all open source. Is there a proprietary? What is the proprietary alternative to React or Angular or what have you? Is there one? I can't imagine there. I mean, haven't they all died? Isn't it all open source?
Is Swift open source?
That's fair.
Swift is open source.
But are maybe on these mobile ecosystems? But it feels to me that like all that stuff is open source, which is actually a pretty big step in the right direction.
Probably the only real analogs are native platform stuff like Microsoft Foundation classes or whatever. That's probably been open source at this point.
Oh, Microsoft keeps trying to. I mean, they've had like 4 or 5 different GUI toolkits now that are supposed to be the native way of doing Windows apps. First you had Win32, then you had MFC, then Windows Forms, then WPF, Universal Windows Platform, and now WinUI is supposed to be the new thing. And most developers are ignoring, most third-party developers seem to be ignoring what Microsoft is doing and saying either we'll keep going with our old Win32 code or we'll use Electron.
Ironically, like
hell, even some teams in Microsoft use Electron.
Ironically,
like
WPF from a programming perspective, like at least in its original incantation, basically was like Swing that they were going to pretend was not Swing. Something lawsuits, but like
it was Swing that required for its time a relatively high-end GPU.
I mean, the whole idea of native applications is kind of going away to some extent because outside of highly specialized, very vertical things, it's just not necessary anymore. Like, who cares? Like run it in a web browser. It doesn't matter. I can take a performance hit on my absurdly powerful desktop machine, which itself is kind of going away because I can do most of the stuff. Like right now, I'm doing this on my phone, right? I can't even do this on my desktop.
Whoever thought the internet would be fast enough for Google Docs?
Indeed.
And as far as accessibility is concerned, just because I'm sure someone is wondering what I think about this, it's probably I would say it's generally easier to get accessibility right in a web app than in a native app, at least on Windows.
Well, I would hope so. I mean, if nothing else, like you have structured markup that the application could be sending to the end user. Whether they do or not, I think is, maybe not so much anymore, but that's the theory anyway. I did want to make, there is an interesting analogy to be made when we talked about sort of Sun in the Java days back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and the idea of reference implementations. Maybe the analogy is more that my impression of the way that Sun was looking at Java was the way that the X11 people looked at X and like the Athena toolkit. They were like, look, we're going to give you, here's a bunch of standards. We're not going to we're going to give you mechanism, not policy. That was always kind of the mantra in the X11 world. And it kind of felt like that's what the Sun folks were doing with Java. They were very interested in the standards and owning those. They were not so interested in like the actual baked in software ecosystem.
Yeah, I also just
I remember that mantra. Yeah.
I feel we just did as a company, we did just a very poor job of going and connecting it all to actually deliver something of value to the end user. I mean, Dan, I just had my head in my hands when you're describing. Okay, first of all, the WTC office. I mean, I was in that office. Would have been the same time you were, basically in early 2001. Thankfully, no one was in that office on the morning of 9/11, and the only Sun employee lost was actually on one of the aircraft. But I can just feel like I'm in the room with you when they're saying like, "Oh no, this is not for production apps. This is not for." It's like, what are we doing here? Are we talking about? Aren't you trying to sell me? Like, aren't you at the end trying to make a product that I am going to pay money for? And I feel that like a lot of things that we were doing didn't make that impossible. In fact, they would have made it easier, but it did require us to connect more dots than we tend to connect.
Well, Sun was where I thought was server, right? I mean, I got a wonderful X server from Sun, but I didn't get Motif, you know?
Right.
Well, this is what I feel like was the biggest gap in this essay was this notion of a rational actors in this environment. And one of my favorite anecdotes from Sun along these lines is Jonathan Schwartz stood up in front of the audience, pointed to Open Solaris downloads and the number, and said, "We know where each of those is from, and each one of those is a potential buyer of the ZFS appliance because they're all downloading Open Solaris for ZFS." And I just thought the sequence, the like mental gymnastics to get from one place to the other made no sense. In other words, there might have looked like there was an open source strategy, but that is very generous.
Well, and so, yeah, I mean, this is very on point, Adam, because I believed in the abstract in that strategy, but then there was no real execution on it. And in particular, there was a company that had adopted effectively everything that Sun had put out in terms of software and wanted to also buy Sun hardware and to run all the Sun software on. And they couldn't get the hardware to show up. And do you know where I'm going with this, Adam?
No.
Oh,
no.
So this is, that company wrote a blog entry called The Sun Does Not Shine on Me. And that's Jason Hoffman at Joyent. And in The Sun Does Not Shine on Me, Jason describes and you would definitely have to go to the Web Archive to get this one. This is long before I was at the company, but describes how enthusiastic they were to adopt all of this Sun software and how heartbreaking it was that he couldn't make hardware. And he's like, and actually, like, someone from Dell actually saw this and immediately made Gear show up and solved all my problems for me from a go-to-market perspective. And I think you know who that person was from Dell, Adam.
Oh, really? Was that Steve?
It's Steve.
That's awesome. I have no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah. So our boss, my co-founder, Oxide CEO, Steve Tuck, that was the person at Dell and Steve's got terrific stories about the inside of making that happen, where he basically, in classic, like, scrappy go-to-market fashion, diverted a box that was headed towards another customer, apologized to them, diverted it to Jason, and got a huge win at Joyent. And ultimately, I don't think Steve is here. If he is, he's going to go volunteer. But he couldn't get Dell to take Facebook seriously as a customer, and left Dell because Dell did not see Facebook as a relevant Dell customer in this would have been like 2009.
So open source successful in breaking down those barriers, but then then it's down to execution.
That was it.
Broken down the barrier.
That was it to me. It's just like, and actually, like, there's a certain degree to which that was the moment we were doomed, because all of the strategy in the world cannot make up for poor execution. And I felt like there were a bunch of strategic things had been done correctly. And now is the time to, like, hey, good news, everybody. All we need to do is take the purchase order and make the Gear show up and support that customer and stand by them. And we couldn't do it.
I heard that Sun totally lost Wall Street after 2001 because of failure to execute in the aftermath of the attack.
So that's it.
They just could not get shipments together in a hurry.
Well, so there were a bunch of things. And so, all right, so I do have to tell this story. When I spent a lot of time going back and forth to New York in from 2001 to 2006, and there were a bunch of things. I don't know how much of that was 9/11 aftermath, Tom. There's at that point now Linux on x86 is like indisputably performing quite a bit better than Solaris on SPARC, and there are a bunch of other issues that are going on. And Sun is kind of losing the plot at the same time, where we've got a lot of exciting things happening with ZFS and dtrace and so on, and then Andy Bechtolsheim and Kalea and the x86 servers, and there's a whole bunch of reason for optimism. But at the same time, like huge struggles. And I'm going out to New York a lot. And I at one point, one of the reps was just like, "Hey, I just want to thank you for, I know you're out here a lot, and I appreciate it, and we appreciate it, and it's great to have you out here with the accounts and with our customers." I'm like, "No problem, of course." Of course, I'm only out here a fraction of the time that Jonathan is out here. And he's like, "Yeah, no, actually, Jonathan has never been out here." I was like, "What?" And
wow.
So, Jonathan would not travel, and I'll leave it at that. Jonathan refused to travel, and I don't think you can be a CEO of a global 2000 company and refuse to travel, because I think this is like just life advice. When you have customers, you need to go visit the customer where the customer is, and you need to go. I mean, Adam, you and I did this a lot, going and like,
yeah.
And I know you did this a ton at Delphix as well, in terms of like actually going out to the customer site, being with them, seeing their problems through their eyes. I mean, because I know you did a ton of that, like I said, at Post Sun as well.
Yeah, no, invaluable in getting the real. I don't know, the real dirt and hearing the real anger from customers.
Well, because an executive briefing center is a home game. And if you only play home games, you are actually only seeing those customers that are already like your big advocates and so on. You're not actually seeing. So, Tom, during those kind of years, I don't know, Adam was with me on a couple of these occasions. We go to customers that were just like, oh my God, they were so hostile because they were already like kicked Sun out. And you're thinking like, I just need to like, I've got like 1 minute, and in that 1 minute, I need to buy 2 minutes, and in the 2 minutes, I'll buy 5 minutes. And that was always with like a dtrace demo. And I always loved like demoing dtrace in those days. And Adam, I know you had a lot of these experiences too, where like there's this predisposition to being like, I really want to kick you out, and you're making it hard because this actually sounds kind of interesting. And then you get to the demo, and they're like, I just remember being with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange in particular, and we are standing in the hallway outside, like they won't let us into their office. And they all have their arms crossed, basically being like, we're about to call security. And I'm kind of like explaining dtrace. And finally, the guy has this like huge sigh. He's like, all right, come in. It's just like, all right, woohoo. And we sat down and gave him a demo. He's like, oh, God, yeah, this looks pretty good. Yeah, this looks
I'm
good.
so unhappy right now.
I'm like, you've made my life so much more complicated. Like, it would have been so much simpler. But I do feel, and it's kind of ironic because we actually got to the Spolsky piece, Adam, from this tweet that was going around about the asteroid headed to Sun called Linux on x86. And I think it's more complicated than that. I think it's.
Yeah, I saw that as well and agreed. It's a multifaceted, layered onion of dysfunction.
It's just really important to be customer centric. You got to really like when you're, and this is something that I always like. I just have really admired about. I mean, in particular, something that Amazon does very well is that Amazon's super customer centric, and you've got to be that customer centrism is so important, and obviously not at all costs. But there's a lot you can go do. I think that Sun did not go do. Anyway.
I guess I got a quick question. I've tried to jump in a couple
times. Yeah, sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
Shy, so no, don't worry about it. And I'm really glad you brought up the Amazon side of things, or Amazon as a customer-centric sort of company, because it leads into this question I have, which is like, I've only read about Sun Microsystems. I'll betray my age here. I'm a little bit younger.
My daughter thought it was a brewery, and so as long as you knew it was a computer company, we're in good shape.
But I've read a little bit about it, and I guess it's hard to see it, outside of the context that we're in now. And it's sort of like we're talking about the division between open source, or not open source, but software and hardware, and where do you make the money and all that stuff. And I'm seeing it in the context of now of like the open core model and what's going on with Elasticsearch and whatever, weird name Amazon made up that I can't remember, and how like they're trying to make money off like they Elasticsearch was making money, still are, but now they're trying to make more money by trying to keep Amazon from taking that money. And I guess it's sort of the flip side of the like there are companies that figured out how to make money off of open source, and now they're on to the next problem. But I'm wondering why during the Sun Microsystem heydays, when they were really trying to figure out how to monetize this great open source stuff that they had, did they try something akin to open core, or was it sort of not feasible for some reason?
For sure. I mean, Sun had a bunch of different models under one roof, effectively. So what Java was pursuing was very different than what Solaris was pursuing, was different than what Spark was. It was not very coherent. In that regard, Sun performed a lot of experiments for us, so we can see a bunch of different things. I mean, I think that, my belief, and this is kind of in this 2004 piece, that my belief was always that you want to use open source as a way to drive demand for the thing that you indisputably monetize. What will people pay for? And people will pay for a service, any service, right? Whatever it is, people will pay for a service because someone else is doing something for them. And I have always felt that Amazon could be much more forthcoming with open source than it has been historically and not damage itself, because people are still going to pay for Amazon because the service is so valuable. And
they're clearly not paying for the user interface.
Josh may have been dealing with the AWS user interface quite a bit. They're not paying for the Studio console. We know that, right, Josh?
Well, or the web thing, or like almost the command line tooling. The client. I hear about this customer obsession, but I'm waiting to see it.
There you go. But I feel that and open source serves as a way of driving all of that complementary demand. And I don't know that Sun was not that coherent about it. I don't know, Adam, what do you think? I just feel like there was not. It was too.
No, for sure. I mean, Sun's not that coherent about it, but I think that. Even we talk about Elastic. I don't know that that's a great model, and that Open Core is that great of a model. But agreed that you need to drive people towards the thing that you incontrovertibly are adding value that they will pay for. And I think there are a lot of takes in it, but I don't think we've solved that, writ large, or in a way that can be applied generically.
Yeah, Sun was selling hardware, but the hardware was falling behind.
Yes.
The software had more political power, but was never monetized.
That's right, and I think that we needed to use that to deliver a better system, and that's the thing that I find. I mean, to me, God's own open source model is when you are using open source to drive hardware sales, because that is like. And Apple could be completely open source and would not lose a single sale. I mean, to the contrary, Apple would be much more dominant, I think, if they were much more forthcoming. They believe their secrecy is very important to their success. I think so. Yeah.
But then, if Mac OS were completely open source, and that would basically make what we currently call Hackintoshes legitimate. And everyone would just run Mac OS on their PCs, right?
No, I don't think so.
Sorry.
Well, there was a period of time when the Macintosh hardware was pretty lackluster. And it's only with the M1 that all of a sudden it's like, wow, it's great stuff.
Yeah, and I guess I'll throw this in there.
Macintoshes. I mean, I can tell you that I have a Mac because I like the software, not because I care about the hardware.
Yeah, that's right. Ben, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot that that's my Twitter username.
Yeah, sorry. Listen, man, you got to keep track of your alts here,
Yeah, just this is my 10th sock bucket. No, I'm kidding. I guess the question that comes up when people talk about open source, it's like, especially in regards to free software, it's like, why are you doing this and for who? Like the comment that was made of like, if Mac OS was open source, everyone would run it on their laptops and Apple would be, penniless or whatever. It's like, that's my mom's not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that for her. I tried that with Linux one time. It was awful, right? Like I got her a desktop and put Linux on. I was like, this is going to be better. And that was disrespectful to her, to be honest. So I've kind of learned my lesson on that.
Has she forgiven you? Has she been like, I wasn't able to print for 3 years because of you and your
no Christmas card this year.
That's right.
An iPhone and an Apple Watch really fixed that one up.
No Christmas card because she couldn't print it?
Oh!
But I guess my point being here is like for free software, it's like, who's it free for? Is it free for the end user to do whatever they want, or is it costly, not free for the end user because they don't know what they're doing, right? Is it for the experts or is it for the consumers, right? And that's sort of the lens that I try to think about this.
I guess Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing a reason why Joyent was comfortable with making all of Smart Data Center open, or Triton open source, was because I guess you guys figured that the real value that you were providing and the thing that companies would be willing to pay for was the service of helping them get it set up in their data center and
critically, you had a kernel engineer you could call up who would fix the thing that you had happened to you that was terrible with a hypervisor or whatever. Like that was,
So I guess you weren't worried about
deeply complex interactions from a support perspective. Like, I mean, just it's amazing. Like you sell these turnkey things that totally work for you on one machine and for one customer, and then the next customer comes along and they're like, "My network's funny," and like in a way that no one could have predicted, and it takes 16 hours of support to like figure out what's wrong with their thing. Like, that's worth a lot of money.
It is worth a lot of money. And so to that point, our as you can imagine, when we were contemplating open sourcing it all at Joyent, I mean, we're obviously talking to our customers about it and getting their perspective. And one of our largest customers is like, I just want to know that I can continue to pay you. I'm like, yes, of course you continue to pay us. Sorry. Yes, you can continue to pay us.
By all means.
Right. And so which was telling us, because I just want to make sure that, like, you're going to continue to give me this great support and this great product that I've had. And like, yeah, absolutely. It's like, then yes, great. Awesome. I can't wait.
So, Brian, you made two comments, one earlier when I thought I was going to speak up and I didn't because the topic moved. But you spoke about Sun being interested in growing the pie and just more.
Did anyone dispute?
The vision for a hardware company. I'm still here.
Yeah. You cut out just for a second after growing the pie.
Yeah. Okay, so the growing the pie thing, and then there was the comment about open source and hardware together making a lot of sense. What was the thinking at Sun at the time around Linux, and why wasn't Sun one of the first companies to embrace Linux? Why was it IBM? That seems like it could have been a very different future for them if they'd backed the Linux horse and made sure Sun hardware worked great on Linux and provide brilliant servers that never give you any trouble. It just seems like a fit. Or was it that we've got our own stuff and it's better and we want you to play with our open source?
Well, I mean, that question's obviously a trap, but I mean, ours was better. I mean, that's honestly, if you want my honest opinion, it's like what we saw and still see, honestly, is like there are still tons of things that I mean, it's, whether it's service management, fault management, file systems, observability, debuggability.
So bring those capabilities to Linux, right? Like grow the pie and
you can't
participate with
unfortunately, you can't force people to be other than who they already are.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at right now, ZFS on Linux has been ported to Linux for how long, and it still is. It's been made clear it's never going to be adopted. It is into mainline. It is a rampant layering violation.
Well, and they have no compunction about breaking it if it's convenient.
Right. So I mean,
but on the other hand, Ubuntu fixes it all up, and it's trivial to install.
Right, that's right. That's right, and so which is great. So terrific, and good on them. I mean, I do think that. So I mean, I don't know. That would not have solved Sun's issue. Let me put it that way. That is not that I do not view that as.
I want to disagree with you on one though, Brian. Like if Sun had been participating all the years, wouldn't they have a lot more to say about the direction? I mean, that's kind of how it goes with open source. Those who do get to decide, right? And if you have a history of doing that over time, might the story not be different?
I mean, I had never worked at Sun, but I think that it's also important to contextualize this in the historical context of what's happening at the time. Like, Linux was viewed very much as a toy for, like, well into the 2000s. You know, in 2006 or 2007 was when it started becoming kind of real to run, like, enterprisey type things on Linux. At least that was my impression. And, you know, like, something to bear in mind is that there was a proposal within Sun back in, like, the early 90s to open source the BSD-based Sonos version 4.
Dan,
that unfortunately never went anywhere.
You know who that's from, right?
Yeah, I know who that's from.
That's right. That's Larry McCoy.
I did, yeah.
But on the Linux front, you know, Sun bought Cobalt for $2 billion, right?
$2 billion Confederate dollars, Tom. That's all inflated Sun W stock price, circa 1999.
Jeez, I hope they sold quickly.
But then it was pretty much killed by the antibodies because everyone thought it was a toy.
I mean, you know, the writing was on the wall for Sun well before the year 2000, unfortunately. I remember around 1997, 1998, talking to a system administrator who pointed to two PCs, and he's like, look, these things are half as good as a Spark Station, but they cost a quarter as much.
Yeah.
Like, give it another 2 years, you know, like it's just not going to be a comparison.
It feels like the biggest missed product direction would have been to have paved the earth with x86 machines with good management. Like, because the LOMs and stuff were better than many of the competing things, but there just weren't many units being sold. Like,
that's right. I think a lot of people get confused by this Linux kind of red herring, and it is much more about the price performance of the hardware.
And missing the x86 boat.
That's
right.
Yeah.
Frankly,
I left in '94, and a part of that was the Spark roadmap was looking really bad even that early.
Yes, SMP saved Spark in that Spark had underperforming but wildly parallel systems. And that's SMP bought us. And I know, Adam, Adam and I had this moment during the boom when we had just seen the pricing on some boxes. Obviously you remember this, Adam.
Yeah, I remember. I wasn't going to toot my own stupid Prussian horn, though.
You should toot your own stupid Prussian horn. Go ahead.
Well, so we were, I think I was an intern even at the time. I'm not sure if it was an intern or I just joined. It was, 2000 or 2001. And we had just released it. It was like an 8-core or 8 socket, right?
Yep, 8 CPU, yeah.
System. And it cost like $100,000?
Yeah, V80, yeah.
And I said, $100,000 seems like a lot of money. And we're like, yeah, I don't know. Seems like a lot of money. I said, well, couldn't you buy like 100 computers, like x86 piece of shit computers and like string them together or something? And at that moment, we should have like pulled the fire alarm and like forced an all hands on that topic, but instead we just like went to lunch.
Even if you only bought 50 with ECC memory,
that's right. That's right. Well, and the thing is, Adam, you and I both remember exactly where we were when we had this conversation. We remember this conversation vividly. I remember you being like, "Hey, just explain it to me because I'm sure there's a reason for this."
Right. I'm new
here, and why would someone do that? And I remember thinking, like, why would someone do that? That does seem weird. I don't know.
Go figure. I'm sure someone's thinking about it.
I'm sure someone's thinking above my pay grade. Meanwhile, I think you and I both want the time machine to go back to ourselves and be like, no, like it's like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure for x86 economics.
Pick at that thread a little bit, and you could either save the company or become a billionaire or die trying.
That's right.
The sad thing was that the Opteron wave happened, right? And Sun was there. They had Opteron boxes. When AMD 64 happened, and x86 grew up to become a real 64-bit architecture with a future, and a wholly new CPU product line emerged, Sun had some of the first and best servers that contained those things. and then I guess they sold 8 of them and stopped. I don't know. Like they were not expensive compared to like HP boxes at least. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
But Sun don't really want to go the low margin game that Dell and HP were doing.
Right, but that's good night, Irene. I mean,
but that was the thing. I mean, I remember at the UltraSpark announcement, that, the local Sun reseller booked a room at some restaurant, and a bunch of us went to see this thing. And McNeely gets up on stage, and I remember him saying this. And if you thought that DEC Alpha was the fastest microprocessor on the market, it's not. It's the UltraSpark one, right? And like my impression of that was that, gee, all the like weird RISC workstation manufacturers are one-upping each other. And that's not all that useful because Intel is quietly making gains with the Pentium.
Yes.
And they're just cutting the margins razor thin and making it up on volume. What are you guys doing? You're gonna get buried.
Well, the margins were not razor thin and they have never been razor thin for the CPUs for Intel. Intel's always had pretty fat margins. But I do think that Josh is right that in 2005-ish, there was a lot of reason to believe that a renaissance was possible, because I do think that a bunch of those things were righted, and Sun had been through rough times before, 1991, and it kind of emerged. And I did feel that it was possible, but it is also true that there was not really deep interest in running a business at the top of the company. And it's
pretty unfortunate because the X2100 was like pretty good at the time. Like they were, cheap and fast and had a LOM that worked. Like, honest to God, I wish that I had a rack of X2100s right now compared to the gigabytes and tie-ins and stuff like that we've got in the corner. I mean, geez.
All right, so Josh, it is worth explaining an act of particular cruelty that we have inflicted upon you personally. So Josh is at Oxide, engineer at Oxide, one of the founding engineers of Oxide.
Hello.
But we have needed. I mean, you've got to develop the software before you actually have the computer built. So poor Josh has had to go stand up the gigabytes and the tie-ins. And Josh, I think we should start a computer company. I don't know about you. I think
I'm ready. Sign me up.
So you've had to suffer with it. It's like, yes, I know. I know it's the thesis of the company that these things are terrible. By the way, they're actually terrible, and I'm actually having to deal with it.
As far as I can tell, when this computer boots up that I have, it engages a USB NIC driver to talk to the BMC. And then asks for the boot posture that I have set in the BMC, which I did via the API. 60% of the time, it accepts the new information, and the other times it doesn't. But it doesn't even print a message to say that it didn't. It merely boots the wrong thing, and there's no way to know.
But someone's going
to reboot it. It might work. Maybe. I don't know. It's just
must be using UDP over USB.
So, like, as a customer, Spark didn't have any of those problems. It was just extremely slow. That's really and too expensive. It was slow and expensive, but seriously, it had no other problems. Like,
excuse me, there was and then there was the occasionally cache parity error. So it's like slow,
that's true.
And expensive, and not very reliable.
So like late UltraSpark 3, UltraSpark 4, T1, T2 era stuff didn't have that specific problem. But like seriously, it's just like buy our stuff and UEFI things and ASpeed and AMI and like it's just all such trash.
I'm so sorry, Josh. I'm so sorry. And I feel that like because you know what we're building, it's like you must be awake during the surgery. You must feel like I can feel all of the pain now, much more sharply.
Well, it's like the thing is that again, the X2100 that Sun could have made more of didn't have these problems, but it had a fast Opteron in it, and it was cheap. So
we couldn't make them show up. That's the problem. Sorry, I know.
Hey folks,
sorry,
Peter Corliss here. I just wanted to chime in because I was actually a Sun customer at Cisco around 2000, etc. And I just wanted to say that we stuck by Sun for a long while. And the reason being is because we were one of the earliest, biggest websites, before these massive search systems got started, Facebook, all the social media companies. But just as a company website, we were pretty darn, high end there. And so we use the Suns because they could support vertical scaling. Like you can get, at the time, 8 CPUs was a lot, right? You couldn't get that on an x86 box. In fact, the big thing though was that Sun could scale vertically, but they never really figured out the horizontal scalability.
Yeah.
And I think that if they had done that, if they had had a better horizontal scalability system, they could have done a totally different kind of architecture to continue to support as systems are scaling out. And then I think, it's unspecified here, but one of the nails in the coffin was Nginx. Once you started having these architecture systems that supported horizontal scalability, so cheap commodity hardware could do in mass what you could do with these vertically scaled Sun boxes. And I think that's really the inflection point for Sun.
Okay, this is actually a really interesting point, actually, because I think you're absolutely onto something. Obviously, I mean, you're very much in our current thesis, so obviously very strongly agree. But because you're actually getting to the larger impact of open source, namely, we would not have been able to build, we humanity would not have been able to build these scale-out systems without open source. If Nginx had been strictly proprietary, you couldn't do it. Economically, you couldn't do it. And Google couldn't have built what Google built without open source. Amazon could not have built what Amazon built without open source. They needed actually open source to make that commercially viable from a software perspective. And you're right that Sun never really, and there are a bunch of reasons for it that I think have to go to market and the way people are incentivized and compensated and a bunch of other things. But Sun definitely did not really embrace those scale-out systems.
Yeah, but also I want to give credit. A lot of people don't realize, again, some people said that they're too young to remember Sun. I remember them well. And I remember going to this one conference, and this is before 9/11. And there's this one trading firm on Wall Street. And I was asking, so why do you use, every single trader they had a Sun Spark station on their desktop. Not just a PC, a Sun Spark station. And it was well, why do you have that hardware on everybody's desktop? She says, because if we can calculate derivatives microseconds or milliseconds faster, we win the bid. And it was that level of hardware, that silicon. I mean, that's still available today in high frequency trading. And now there's ASICs. But at the time, that was what you were trying to do, is that you would make billions on whether you could just calculate faster. And, so so for those kind of use cases, Sun was just unparalleled. But obviously, the reason why x86 won is because 90% of use cases don't rely upon that kind of millisecond scale difference. Most users, blink of an eye, performance is fine enough.
Well, and then x86 was just faster on those things. So it's if you're...
But it took a long time for x86 to get to that point.
It was true by... I mean, it's interesting that Tom says he saw the writing on the wall by 94. Certainly for me personally, the inflection point was at 98. So in 98, with the Pentium Pro, it is very quick. And then certainly by 99, 2000, and we were trying to kind of express at the same time, Adam, how many of those Cheetah Plus meetings did you get roped into?
Too many.
Oh, God. I'm so sorry. I roped you into those, didn't I?
Yeah, you absolutely. Thank you for that. But yeah, I mean, you're
have you been waiting for me to say that for 20 years?
Yeah, kind of.
All right.
Kind of. I've been waiting for an apology. I think it was overdue. But yeah, I mean, notice that your desktop back in your dorm room was a lot faster than the Sun box in the computer lab, for sure.
Right. So yeah, exactly. You had an even more visceral experience where you got this supposedly fancy Sun lab at an undergraduate institution, and you're actually, your Sun lab is not as fancy as my dorm room computer, by the way.
Yeah.
We've been trying to keep these to an hour. Clearly, this is an evergreen topic. I think in part because Sun was lovable. I think the reason that this is an evergreen topic is people want to reason about this because there were aspects of Sun that were technologists appreciated, and we'd like to know was the asteroid fated to collide with the Sun Microsystems planet? In conclusion, yes. No, I don't know. On that note, thank you very much, everybody. I think we maybe I actually did a little bit of an exciting news in that we at Oxide are bringing up our first server boards this week. Extremely exciting. So we've got we go to PowerOn next week. I'm about to fly out so to engage in the software bring up. So I don't know that we're going to be here next week. But for all of the right exciting reasons. And as one of our colleagues said, bring up always goes much better than plan or much worse than plan. There's no in the middle. So
we'll see you in 1 week or 17 weeks.
That's exactly right. So on that note,
bring up can really bring you down.
That's right. Hey, with the knock on wood. All right, everyone, take care. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.